Tonight, two flashpoints reveal the dangerous intersection of domestic security, politics, and unchecked military escalation. In New York, a fragile détente emerges between President Donald Trump and Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani after fears of National Guard deployment and a decision that would redraw the boundaries of civilian policing and federal power in America's largest city. But Mamdani's message remains defined. He still calls Trump a fascist while negotiating cooperation with the same man who holds authority over the city's security and economic lifelines. And in Beirut, the Middle East stands on the edge of a wider fire. Israel has assassinated Hezbollah's second-in-command, Ali Tabtabia, deep inside the Lebanese capital, and the strike risks triggering a regional chain reaction from southern Lebanon to Damascus and Gaza, even as Israel insists it does not constitute an escalation unless Hezbollah responds. And I'm Salma El-Fiki, and this is In Focus. The New York Times reports growing reassurance that Trump is backing away from deploying the National Guard into New York City following a surprisingly cordial White House meeting with Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani. And Mamdani insists crime is under control and that the NYPD, not the federal troops, should remain and maintain security. Trump says he plans to help, not confront, but leaves the door open. If they need it, I would do it. Mamdani still openly labels Trump a fascist and a threat to democracy, yet he seeks the federal cooperation on affordability, policing, and infrastructure. It's a political paradox, or a test of where coexistence ends and coercion begins. And we are joined now by Ms. Ginger Chapman, a lawyer and political analyst. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me here today at In Focus. Ms. Chapman, let me ask you, how credible is the White House shift towards cooperation? Is Trump fully stepping back or just merely delaying a confrontation, do you think?
Well, first, thank you for having me today, Salma, and greetings to your viewers.
Thank you very much.
And what we are seeing is political reality. Both Trump and Mamdani need each other in order to carry out their political goals. And even though during the campaign and the run-up to the election of Mamdani as mayor, they both engaged in political theater. They both attacked each other's ideologies. But now that Mamdani is mayor, they will both need each other basically for both of them to carry out their political objectives. First, President Trump is from New York. He's a native New Yorker, and he does have a lot of support in New York. Additionally, New York has been swinging more Republican in presidential elections. So even though New York is a reliably Democrat state, in the last three elections, the Republican support has gone from 36% back in 2016, 37% in 2020, and then in the last presidential election, 2024, had the largest swing at 43% Republican. Mm-hmm. So Mamdani cannot afford to alienate the growing Republican support in his state. Yeah. And then for President Trump also needs Mamdani for his political appearance. Mm-hmm. And this is because Mamdani won on affordability. This is plaguing Americans all over the country, not just in New York. And we saw Trump quickly change his tone, and now Trump is also talking about affordability. That is the impact that Mamdani has had. He has highlighted this problem, and he has also set forth specific steps to combat the affordability crisis, and Trump needs to pay attention to that. Now, some of Mamdani's proposals he really will not be able to carry out. For example, he cannot raise taxes on the wealthy himself. The state capital, Albany, New York, is the only one that can raise state taxes. Albany did say they would work with him on childcare, on transportation. So Mamdani has a lot of support. And the other thing that's very interesting is in New York and indeed across the entire country, our Jewish population votes Democrat 75% of the time.
Yes.
Our Jewish population is reliably Democratic. However, it is the Republicans that bend over backwards to support Israel and essentially work with the military-industrial complex. So politics is very complicated in America.
Well, Ms. Chaplin, let me move on to my second question, where Mamdani insists that he can work with a president who he calls a fascist and he calls him a danger to democracy. Do you think this is a pragmatic governance, or is it called political naivety?
Yes, this is a move towards political reality. Once again, during the campaign, Trump was threatening to look at Mamdani's citizen papers, perhaps deport him, which is an empty bluff. This is Trump speaking. At the same time, Mamdani was using words such as fascist and using a great deal of insults against President Trump. However, now that Mamdani is in office, they will both have to work together. And as we've seen, some of the threats, for example, Mamdani needs to get crime under control. However, he does not want ICE, immigration, and customs enforcement roaming in his city. If Trump wants to tackle immigration in New York, he will need Mamdani's approval if he wants to deploy National Guard.
Actually,
ICE forces.
that's coming to my third question, which is, could the National Guard, do you think, threats resurface again as a leverage if future disputes emerge, or crime statistics or protests maybe?
Yes, absolutely. This is a constant background threat, which is another reason why Mamdani is keeping with his campaign stance of resistance towards Trump, even though he's acknowledging he needs the help of the federal government for some things. And with respect to ICE, or the National Guard specifically, yes, Trump could deploy the National Guard in New York if riots get out of control, if immigration or crime gets out of control. So Mamdani has to walk a fine line, because if Trump does deploy the National Guard, this will make Mamdani look weaker to his constituents. But at the same time, if it gets to that point, Mamdani may well need the presence of National Guard on the streets, and Trump needs Mamdani's approval. So they both need to rely on each other to move forward on any of the more difficult questions.
Do you think Trump's softer tone masks an attempt to neutralize maybe an ideological opponent in the most maybe symbolic city in America, New York?
Yes. Well, he does have to soften his approach. Trump is going to have to work more closely with the leaders of major cities, especially as we're coming into the 2026 midterms. Trump cannot afford negative relations with New York City. So if Trump can soften his approach to Mamdani, if they can achieve a working relationship, this will help Republicans in the midterms, but it will also help Democrats in the sense that they will not have ammunition. If Trump points to New York City and says it's a failure, this hurts Democrats. If Mamdani points to Trump and says he is a fascist, he is attacking American citizens, this will hurt Republicans in the midterms. So everyone is keeping an eye on the midterms. And if they can work together on some of the smaller issues now, this will disarm the bigger issues that could become a problem later. So this is pragmatism and political reality at work, and ideology has to take a back burner. And Mamdani also has to accomplish things for the people of New York. And ironically, Mamdani has acknowledged this as he's weighing in on the House of Representatives, which are also up for re-election in the midterms. Mamdani has thrown his support behind Hakeem Jeffries, who is viewed as a more moderate Democrat than Qnews, who is viewed as a radical Democrat. So we see Mamdani bowing to political reality with Hakeem Jeffries as opposed to Qnews.
Mamdani, as you mentioned earlier, argues affordability. And do you think so? Affordability and policing are connected. Is a federal alignment essential to delivering those promises, do you think?
Well, affordability and policing are not directly connected, and policing is under the jurisdiction of the states, which is why it's always tricky when the federal government, when the president sends in National Guard, because that's one of the very tricky gray areas of American law, the juxtaposition between states' powers and federal powers. But affordability, they do need to work together. Mamdani needs to work with Trump. Well, essentially, Trump is the one who can bring down food prices. Trump's policies and Trump's economic initiatives, and Trump realizes he needs to do this. Trump has been saying everything is great, inflation is down, gas prices are down. However, food inflation is still very high. Food is viewed as costing too much in this country, as well as basic energy. So Trump is going to have to work on affordability for all Americans, and his litmus test is going to be Mamdani's reaction to his economic policies.
And would you think with Mamdani's progressive platform and Trump's authoritarian posture, where's the true flashpoint likely to erupt?
Well, there is the possibility for flashpoints, especially in New York City. These flashpoints will not be affordability. People tend not to riot over affordability. It's usually social justice issues. So a flashpoint that's not on the radar yet, but could come up, is if Benjamin Netanyahu visits New York. Mamdani has said he would honor the International Criminal Court arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Netanyahu is a frequent visitor to New York. The Jewish community there is very important to his support. Yeah. So this could be something down the road. It's not an issue yet. If we do see a flashpoint now, it's going to be over immigration. It will be over Mamdani protecting the rights of immigrants, or even protecting the rights of criminals and poor people caught up in the justice system. Yeah. This is where any immediate flashpoints could come up, especially if crime continues to get out of control and if Trump does threaten to send in the National Guard. However, Trump is also going to moderate. If anything happens, Trump will want to work behind the scenes to not antagonize Mamdani, because Mamdani is becoming a powerful political force in America. His ideas, his ideology, and both of them will have to be very pragmatic, and Trump will have to approach Mamdani with a softened approach to his ideology in order for Trump to keep the working class, minorities, and independents who crossed over from the Democrat Party to vote for Republicans in the last election. So Trump needs to keep minorities, the poor, and the working class to continue to vote for Republicans. Both sides, both Trump and Mamdani, have very important political considerations, and they will have to be pragmatic and work together quietly behind the scenes and also publicly for both of their political careers.
Do you think the struggle between Mamdani and Trump, and that is basically redefining the balance of power between the City Hall and the Oval Office, or is it just reinforcing Washington's dominance?
This is not reinforcing Washington's dominance. In fact, we see Washington is losing ground and losing control. A great example is California and Illinois are both threatening to withhold federal tax dollars from sending them into the federal government. This is a serious form of rebellion if they do continue to speak about this. However, with respect to New York, we see that Mamdani is actually a bit more moderate, perhaps because he is new on the political scene. But Mamdani appears to be more willing to work with DC, and Trump will need, if Trump can make an ally out of Mamdani, because of the increasing Republican influence there, and because Mamdani needs the assistance of the federal government, if they can work together, this will help Trump keep the rebellious blue states under his control, will keep some of their voters voting for Trump in the next elections. And this will also assist Mamdani in carrying out his local New York City reforms, such as affordability, rent control, and the things that he needs the federal government for, which he did allude to in his meeting with Trump at the White House, where he pointed out that Franklin Delano Roosevelt worked very well with Mayor LaGuardia. Roosevelt was a Democrat, LaGuardia was a Republican. So Mamdani is also holding out the olive branch, saying this worked in the past, perhaps we can work together in the present.
Yeah.
But this will help Trump if New York City stays on his side as opposed to rebelling with the rest of the blue states.
Can I ask you, as maybe an American citizen, as a lawyer, as an analyst, do you think Mamdani will eventually be an ally for Trump? What are your thoughts personally? What do you think?
Well, right now it helps Mamdani's political image to be viewed as a rebel, to be viewed as a resistor. Mamdani is a rising star in politics. So right now he has to chart his course and he has to create his identity. However, now that he's in office, and if he does pursue a career in politics, we are seeing the American people push both sides to work together more. The American voters are apprehensive about the deepening divides, the increasing violence we see on the streets, and there are many other issues. For example, the protests on the university campuses in New York that had to do with foreign policy. The American citizens and the American voters are deeply worried about polarization and the possibilities of a civil war spilling out from the Congress and the legislatures and politics out into the streets of America. Things are very volatile, very touch and go. We have midterm elections coming up. So the American voters want to see both sides work together and tamp down the rhetoric and tamp down the violence and the potential for violence.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Ginger Chapman. The handshake may have cooled tensions, but the power struggle still remains very real beneath the surface. And from fragile calm in New York to deadly escalation in Beirut. The Jerusalem Post confirms that the Israeli military assassinated Ali Tabiya, Hezbollah's deputy leader and military commander, in a targeted strike in the heart of Beirut. And this is the highest ranking Hezbollah official killed since 2008. Israel has informed ceasefire monitors that the strike is not an escalation unless Hezbollah retaliates. But multiple injuries and further strikes in the Bekaa Valley indicate expanding operations. Prime Minister Netanyahu claims Israel needs no approvals, stressing complete operational independence. The US was reportedly notified only as the strikes began and not before. This moment could decide whether the border conflict stays limited or transforms into a full-scale regional war. And now we turn to Dr. Mohammed Osman, the International Relations Specialist from Cairo. Welcome, sir, and thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me, Salma. Good to see you.
So let me start off and ask you, how significant is Tabtabi's assassination in terms of Hezbollah's leadership structure and the operational capabilities, do you think?
Well, of course, many people would like to downplay the significance of what happened, but this is a disastrous escalation, actually, and no matter what the Israelis choose to say, because Haytham Ali Tabtabai is the second in command of Hezbollah. If you remember, Fuad Shukr, the chief of staff of Hezbollah, who was assassinated in the summer of 2024, in the prelude of the all-out war launched by Israel against Hezbollah in Lebanon, which culminated in the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and the entire leadership. The prelude to it was the assassination of Fuad Shukr. And this is the successor of Fuad Shukr, which was the military chief of staff. Tabtabai is the military chief of staff of Hezbollah. So this is the first such a high-scale operation or a high-scale assassination of a very high-ranking official in Hezbollah since the ceasefire went into effect back in November 2024. So a year after, and of course, targeting the Lebanese capital, the Dahiya, or the southern suburb, with 8 missiles is quite the escalation, and I think you would agree with me on that, Salma. So it's a very dangerous escalation.
Yeah, actually coming to my next question, where Israel ironically argues the strike is not an escalation. Does anyone in the region actually take that claim seriously?
Well, as you very well know, whatever Israel says never belongs in the realm of what's right or what's wrong, or the realm of logic, basically. So they have their own virtual realities, their own virtual norms and morals, their own virtual international laws. They don't care about anything, unfortunately. If there is a textbook impunity, Salma, a textbook definition of impunity, Salma, then it's how Israel conducts itself in the world, especially, of course, in the region and countries like Syria, Lebanon, and the occupied Palestinian territories. So what's happening right now is a signal of sheer irresponsibility by Israel. Israel has been pushing for escalation. They have been trying to provoke Hezbollah for the past few weeks in order to provoke Hezbollah into responding so that they can launch a new war against Lebanon. It seems on the ground that they are mobilizing the troops. They have redirected thousands of troops and tanks from the south to the north, and they are actually preparing the Israeli public for a new expanded military operation in Lebanon. They just need a pretext to carry it out. And of course, if Hezbollah responds, it will give them the necessary justification.
And what do you think would be the immediate response options, or maybe Hezbollah weighing? And who is inside Hezbollah deciding the timing and scale?
I think Hezbollah, of course, the main decision maker is Naim Qassem, the Secretary General of Hezbollah. And he's one of the very few people left of Hezbollah's leadership, for all we know. And of course, they would have to consult with the Iranians before taking any step forward. However, it is probable that Hezbollah will refrain from responding in an exaggerated way, at least. I don't think they will respond in a way that will lead to an all-out war at this point, because they basically cannot afford it. Another war with Israel at this point will be tantamount to another catastrophe for Hezbollah. It seems that even after a year, they have not been able to plug the security gaps that they have. The fact that Israel can still access and assassinate such high-scale officials in Hezbollah in the middle of Beirut in an apartment. I cannot even imagine how can an organization that has suffered so much damage and so many assassinations by the Israelis would have one of their senior leaders sitting in an apartment in the middle of the southern suburb of Beirut. So it seems that they did not really quite understand yet that they are ultimately infiltrated and that they can be targeted by the Israelis. So if they go to another war, given the circumstances, and of course, in addition to the damage that they have incurred in the last war and the fall of the Assad regime and the weakening of Iran in the 12-day war, it will be tantamount to a huge disaster for Hezbollah. So I think they are eager not to push for any rash escalation at this point, Salma, as you might imagine. However, they might be pushed by their own constituency.
That was my next question coming up. And do you think Netanyahu is seeking to provoke a wider conflict, maybe to regain domestic political legitimacy and maybe deflect criticism? What do you think?
Definitely, he needs a war to survive. He needs a war in order to stay in power and
Yeah.
maintain his popularity. He has created so much popularity and deflected from so many of his flaws, whether in his corruption trials or his failure at October 7th, by engaging in such irrational wars and appeasing or feeding into the urges of the hawks in the Israeli government and the Israeli security establishment and military. And of course, the urge for a war in Lebanon is not only pushed by Netanyahu, it is pushed by the far right in his government and also by the Israeli military. We have to understand that they are actually pressuring Netanyahu because they want to finish the job. They see that Hezbollah now is in a very weakened position, and the time is ripe to basically take them out and completely destroy their capabilities. This is what they're pushing for. It seems the Americans are very lenient with the Israelis. The Americans now, according to Axios, are claiming that they had no prior knowledge. Israeli Channel 13 says otherwise. They said that they approved it and that they do not really mind Israel escalating and targeting the Dahya or the southern suburb of Beirut. So it seems that there are conflicting reports, but I don't believe that the Israelis would take such a very undertake such a very harsh and dangerous escalatory measures without the approval of the United States.
Approval. Yeah.
Of course. So the U.S. probably approved this. And the U.S. gave Lebanon, final point, gave Lebanon an ultimatum until the end of the year so that they would disarm Hezbollah. This is not going to happen. So it seems that the U.S. is paving the way for a new Israeli war in the region.
Well, Beirut now is being considered an open battlefield. How do you think the civilians are bracing? Are they? I mean, how are they taking it? Are they ready for further strikes, do you think? Are they expecting that?
Definitely not. In the last war, about 1.5 million Lebanese people from the south and the east, from the Bekaa and southern Lebanon and the Dahya were displaced. 40 villages and towns were completely wiped off the map. Tens of thousands of housing units were destroyed. So it was a catastrophe for Lebanon, economically and on the humanitarian level as well. So the civilians in these areas will be subjected again to such suffering. They could not rebuild what has been destroyed because Israel has been blocking any efforts to reconstruct southern Lebanon, and the international community has not been giving Lebanon any funds to undertake reconstruction, despite the pledges. They never honored them due to Israeli and American pressure. So unfortunately, if this happens again, the current humanitarian crisis in Lebanon will only deepen, and thousands more will die. In the last war, 4,000 people died. Most of them were civilians. In this war, even more thousands of civilians might die if the Israelis undertake an rash escalation, and if they start bombarding and destroying towns and villages once again, or expanding their areas of occupation in southern Lebanon. So the Israelis are, the Lebanese people are anticipating with fear the possibility of a new war with Lebanon. Now, many countries in the region, including Egypt, are scrambling to mediate in order to prevent such an escalation. However, it seems that the Israelis are still pushing hard for escalation in Lebanon, completely undeterred by the United States, unfortunately.
Can you discuss with us a little bit what would be the consequences for Gaza, Syria, and all the regional actors if Hezbollah decides a limited response is not enough?
I don't think that Hamas is in any shape capable of engaging in a battle to aid Hezbollah at this point. Hamas is in a very tough predicament, and the Gaza Strip has been completely destroyed, and over half of it is occupied by the Israelis. So it is very, very, very unlikely that they will go into wage another war on Israel if Israel decides to strike Hezbollah or open a battlefront with Hezbollah. In Syria, actually, Salman, this is what pains me to tell you, if this happens, we might see factions in Syria joining the Israelis against Hezbollah, because already there has been extreme tensions and clashes and on the border between the Bekaa Valley and Syria, between Syrian government, pro-government forces and with Shiite tribes in the Bekaa Valley that are affiliated with Hezbollah and who are accused of drug smuggling. And these clashes have led to deaths, and government forces in Syria have carried out incursions before into eastern Lebanon. Maybe there could be a deal, a secret deal, and I'm just speculating here, between the new Syrian administration and Israel to just completely take out Hezbollah in a new war.
Mr. Osman, I'm sorry, I'm running out of time, but thank you so much for joining us here today at In Focus. And from the Oval Office to Beirut's skyline, power is being asserted by force. Whether it brings control or collapse will shape the months ahead. And this has been In Focus. Good night.